Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 21 Hats podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Feldman. This week, Paul Downs and Jay Goltz talk about the risks they didn't see coming. While everyone knows there's a risk that a business can fail because it just doesn't work, there are lots of other less obvious risks. These are not the risks you lose sleep over, but they're real. And if you don't manage them, you can expose yourself needlessly to a slew of problems. Because most people learn about these risks the hard way, Jay and Paul set out to create a top 10 list of them. But I think for those of you keeping score at home, we actually hit 11, which led Jay to caution, I by no means am telling anybody, oh my God, I don't sleep at night, I'm worried about all these things. I'm not worried about them, I just keep an eye on them. Wait, says Paul, that's another one. The risk is that you let this thing live in your head and that it destroys your ability to focus on what you should focus on. Okay, so that makes 12. And by all means, please let us know which ones we missed. Even in good times, owning and running a business can be a lonely pursuit. Our hope is that these weekly conversations will let owners know they are not alone in facing challenges. In fact, that's the whole idea behind the 21 Hats community, engaging with other owners to get the kinds of insights only another owner can offer. If you're interested in learning more, step one is to sign up for a free trial of the Morning Report, which highlights the most important news of the day for business owners so you don't have to go looking for it. Step two is to get on our Slack channel, where you can ask questions, get vendor recommendations, and tap the wisdom of a very impressive crowd. Just search the 21 Hats Morning Report to subscribe. Joining me this week on the podcast are regulars Paul Downs, CEO of Paul Downs Cabinet Makers, which is based outside of Philadelphia and makes custom conference tables, and Jay Goltz, CEO of the Goltz Group, whose companies in Chicago include a picture frame business, artist frame service, and a home furnishing store, Jason Home. The episode is titled, Managing the Unexpected Risks of Entrepreneurship. Welcome, Paul and Jay. I got something slightly different in store today. I don't know what we should talk about, and I thought I would just throw it open to you veterans and see what we come up with. What's on your mind?
So my topic of the day could be stuff that you wouldn't necessarily know. What are all of the risks that we face every single day that I would have never been able to make a list of 30 years ago that have come to pass that I recognize there's probably 10 different things that we have to keep an eye on to manage our risk?
That's a good topic. I mean, one that I've been worrying about are the federal cybersecurity protocols described by NIST 800-171P, which anybody doing the business with the Department of Defense needs to comply with. And these are extremely complicated and expensive things to deal with. And I'm kind of on the fence about whether I actually am subject to this or not, because it's certain kinds of information that get handled that require you to have these protocols, and other kinds of information that we mostly deal with, you don't need it. That's a risk. The whole cybersecurity thing.
What you just described, does that fall under the rubric of managing risk or the rubric of jumping through the hoops you have to jump through to do business with the government?
Well, the government is asking us to jump through hoops because there is actually a risk. I think that we're all aware of the things that can happen when you've got the internet attached to your business, which is you're subject to phishing attacks and various kinds of scams, and your employees wasting time on the internet or selling gift cards to strangers. There's 10 million things that the internet brings. It's a bigger attack surface on your company than you would have ever had. Like when I started, all I had to worry about was a padlock on the door.
I had a computer guy once tell me, and he was dead serious when he said this, that the number one risk to bigger companies is one of the executives has their kid come to work with them on a Saturday, and they leave them in the office by themselves on the computer, and they go to deal with something, and the kid goes on to the computer and goes on to some sites they shouldn't be going on to. And the next thing you know, the entire company has been attacked, and he says it happens all the time. So you're right. It's a way bigger platform to get attacked. So that's certainly way up there on the list, just the whole cybersecurity.
It doesn't have to be your kid, though. Your employees do that kind of stuff all the time.
I'm just going, that's one you don't think about.
You train your employees, but you don't train their kids. And I do have a policy where people can bring their children to the office, and we don't necessarily invite them to access our servers, but they're in our network with their iPads or whatever. I'm not really aware, sure exactly how a kid's iPad would take us down, but there's probably a way. So,
well, that's one.
Yeah.
Should we move on to 2, 3, 4, and up to 10?
Well, what's your biggest concern right now in terms of managing risk, Jay?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily my biggest concern, but it's just an ongoing. People need to realize that you've got employee lawsuit potential at any time, and you need to be aware of what the laws are for what you can ask on an interview and what you can't ask. And I understand that most companies can't afford a full-time HR director, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to be aware of what the hiring laws are. So I think it would be in everyone's best interest to go to a seminar, to maybe hire a labor attorney for, a few hours to go through it. There are some basic things that you could get in some serious legal jeopardy. And like I said, just interviewing people, there's lots of stuff you can't ask people on an interview that people are not aware of.
There's one tool you can use prior to an interview that's a relatively recent thing, which is just using a ChatGPT style AI interface to say, hey, I'm in this state. What can I ask, not ask on an interview question? You'll get an answer in about 2 seconds.
Will it be the right answer?
It'll be right enough that for something like that, where ChatGPT is looking at settled law, I would trust it more than something like ChatGPT opinion of the Eagles quarterback or something where it just could be made up in any old way.
I've heard that conversation about what you can do in a job interview over and over again. I don't think I've ever heard, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, I'm not saying it's not important, but I don't think I've ever heard of a lawsuit specifically over an issue like asking somebody about their salary history, which is no longer legal in many states, that kind of thing. How do you assess that risk? Are you aware of lawsuits like that?
There clearly are. I haven't had one, so it's not that, but I'm sure they are out there. The point is, why expose yourself at all? I mean, you just should be careful with, and the law keeps changing. So
but you're talking about managing risk. I'm trying to figure out.
We're also talking about the society's gotten more litigious, that people now have friends that, you should sue them. If you would have complained about an interview before or getting fired, your friend would go, that's terrible. Now the first thing you're going to say is, you should sue them. I mean, the newspaper is filled with lawsuits regularly about this kind of thing.
Can I reframe this conversation a different way?
Go for it.
Which is that hiring is one of the things that you have to do as a business owner. And there's going to be a point, if you start a little tiny business and you start operating totally however you feel like it, and you start to grow and you start to add people, there's a point where you have to build procedures to do things that you have to do over and over again. And when you don't do that, you're increasing your risk of whatever the task is. So hiring could be one of those. Firing could be another one. Internal operations, evaluations. There's a million different things that if you have not sat down one day and said, this is how I want this to go, each one of these should have these steps. These are the boundaries. You're just at risk of, if you tell somebody to do it without a procedure in place, they may do whatever the hell they think. Or you may do that if you're in a bad mood. And then if you add to that the likelihood that as you get more and more employees, and even if you don't have a big crew at any given time, just being in business, like I've been in business almost 40 years, and I think that if you added up all the employees I've ever had, it's 200 some at this point, even though I only have 28 now. So the more people you're encountering, the higher the chance you're going to get that bad apple. And I had a brush with that in the last 2 years because I hired an employee who turned out to be sort of a grumbly person. And I knew her previous employers and had asked them. I always call about references, just like Jay tells me to. And they said, they gave me the goods and the bads and kind of hinted at this person is a grumbler, but we needed someone. And they all said she was a good craftsperson. I'm like, great. So we got her in here, and sure enough, she turned out to be a grumbler. And eventually she quit. But I had always been very, very careful to make sure that all interactions were just about the job. And when she got to her next employer, that person anonymously emailed me and said, boy, she's been complaining about you. Watch out.
Ugh.
But nothing actually has happened from it because I had been kind of like, let's make sure that we're managing somebody fairly all the way through. And I think that that's just an example of how not thinking about your operations is a risk. That when you do things by the seat of the pants, that's risky. And when you design procedures and manage and train and act like a big person, like a grown-up, you're running a company, you have to do these things, even if they may not be what brought you into the business. Like, I like to make things out of wood. I spend 0 hours a week doing that now. And all of it is spreadsheets and management.
Well, that's kind of the point. That's most people's story. And the point is, this is called 21 hats. Those are two of the hats: hiring, firing. I do speeches. I say none of us went to boss school, and everyone would laugh, but it's true. If you went to boss school, they tell you, here's some outlines for hiring. Here's some outlines for checking references. I agree with everything you said. The one word you didn't say was needlessly exposing yourself. It's needlessly exposing yourself. A little bit of energy on the front end, you can avoid putting yourself out there. So hiring is the number 2 exposure. And 3, you better understand the laws about firing. And to be fair, part of my perspective is my daughter-in-law is a labor attorney. So I hear the stories from her, and they're pretty horrifying. And I've helped her out as a lawyer, helping coach her, because some of the stuff is so easily avoidable. You just say to yourself, they did what? I mean, stupidly said stuff that just came back to haunt them. So I do think it's worth, whether it's buying a book, going to a seminar. If you're hiring people, you should get a little training on that. None of these things are like everyday horrible, but if you add them all together, you got some exposure to risk. And take back to your point, Lauren, you'd say, well, how much do you hear about that? I would say, add all 10 of these exposures together. Yeah, I bet you once a year something happens. I mean, that is the reality. So if it's not one thing, it's the other thing. And we need to be, try to stay ahead of it.
So managing employees is actually a big risk. I would say another one is managing customer risk. We do a lot of business with various municipalities, and a lot of times the terms of the deal are going to be, we're basically going to finance it. Now, when it's the federal government who tells me that, I'm like, fine. I know you're going to pay me. I've been down this road. When it's a little city in Arizona, their human services department, they issue a PO and you kind of hope for the best. But then at the end of the day, you may or may not be able to easily get paid because the one person who issued the PO has now quit and everybody else hated them. And, it's like there's a lot of things that can go wrong, even with things that look like they're good, and leave you hanging out there after you've done work.
So make that number 4, which is a very good one, giving credit. That's a huge risk, and you can't be naive with that. You need to understand how to manage that, and should you be giving them credit in the first place and getting a credit app signed, knowing who's responsible? Basically, of this 10 things, I'm going to say I don't know that there's any one of these 10 that I haven't had a problem with over the years. Maybe only once in 46 years, but each one of these is another exposure. So receivables is a very good one. That's 4.
What did you figure out?
I made sure my employees know before someone gets credit, there needs to be a credit app filled out, and either the controller needs to sign off, or if it's, some gigantic company, just have me sign it. I'll sign it. But somebody needs to sign off on it, because you just don't give credit to any company that shows up and says, oh, I want to get 30 days.
We have much less problem with companies, honestly. It's not getting paid, it's when you get paid. And what is trickier is if you're dealing with municipal and government authorities, because they have a budgeting process. They issue you a PO. It's not like they're defrauding you. It's just that the wheels of payment may be very, very slow.
Okay, well, I'm in retail. I frame thousands of pictures a year. There's a rule I've had for many, many, many years. Everybody leaves a deposit. I mean, we're not going to start framing a picture and not get a deposit. And if the customer goes, well, you've got my artwork. Yeah, we can't sell your art. We don't have those arguments anymore. Customers just pay. And I've told many frame shops when I do speeches at the frame show, you need to start getting deposits, because the problem is sometimes they bring something to get framed. It costs more than they thought. And then they change their mind later and they just never pick it up. And you're sitting there with their art forever, and it's bad. So getting paid is, I would put that as number 4 for sure. Getting paid. That's a good one.
My very first conversation with a government buyer was with a guy from the Navy, and this was back maybe 2004. And we talked about a project, and I gave him a quote, and he's like, "Great. What are your terms?" I was like, "Well, we get a 50% deposit." Boom, phone goes down.
Yeah.
We're the Navy. We don't pay a deposit.
No, I got it.
Nobody in the federal government does. And if I didn't get my head around that, I wouldn't do any of the business that I do. The business would be half the size it is, because not only does being willing to accept those terms open up new markets for you, but it's a basis of future growth when you get word of mouth, which doesn't work great in the furniture industry, but it works great in some contexts, particularly military.
Here's a subtle thing that you wouldn't have known. This is years ago. Some places don't take American Express because they charge more. And I decided I was going to take it, and I didn't used to. So I started taking American Express. And right after I started doing it, a customer actually said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you're taking American Express now. I used to just bring my personal framing, and now I can bring in the company framing," because all she had was the American Express card. So I tell people the difference in rate between American Express and Visa MasterCard, it's not that much. I am confident you're losing business if you don't take American Express. So that's one of those subtle things you figure out along the way. So it's about managing your risk in that. So that was 4. We ready for 5?
Yeah, insurance, right?
Insurance has gotten way more expensive than it used to be. And my insurance bill is hundreds of thousands of dollars. I just sat down with the broker and I realized I'm overinsured. I got too much insurance for too much exposure, and I wasn't paying enough attention to it. And you really need to drill down every year. How much inventory do you really have? For instance, the one I caught was, they've got $500,000 of insurance for art that's in the van. I said, I couldn't fit $500,000 worth of framing and art on a van. I cut it to 100. So, there's a few $1,000, and there's my sprinkler in my building it's 100 years old. So they're not counting it as a sprinkler building. It's costing me a fortune, but the cost of putting in the sprinkler is a lot. It's a job. Again, it's one of the 21 hats. Insurance. It's something you need to manage.
I think one that people might want to look for in insurance that I ran into this last year is the policies that I buy in Pennsylvania. We get a premium estimate at the beginning of the year, and then they run an audit procedure.
Right. That's for workman's comp, right?
For workman's comp and also for liability. They want to see what your actual sales were. And what I've found is that I got a big bill at the end of my audit last year. And I was like, what the hell is this? And I looked carefully, and they had misclassified all my employees as being in a carpentry situation as opposed to a furniture manufacturing situation. And what that meant is the workman's comp premium for carpenters was something like $58 per 100. And the workman's comp for furniture manufacturing is $2.30 per 100.
Which is still high compared to other stuff, because I'm in that world too. I had to take people out of woodworking to what you're talking about and say, wait, they're cutting mats. That's not woodworking. And it was a huge number. I took a bunch of employees and said, okay, they're not woodworking. That's another thing. And then I don't think to this day there's still a category called picture framing. So every picture framer in the country has a different insurance person sticking it under some category, and maybe you're not paying attention to it. So that's absolutely something worth looking at.
Yeah, I mean, the risk is that when you initially set up your company, and if they're doing any kind of production, you want to check and see what the insurance agent said your labor class was, because you're paying very, very different rates on workman's comp depending on what they think that job is.
Office workers is like 0.5%, and to your point,
that's nothing.
Woodworking is 5.5%. Well, if they put it in the wrong category, it might not be $1 million, but you might be blowing $300 a year, $500 a year on each employee, and it adds up.
I highlighted an item in the morning report recently that it's become routine for families with kids to have $20,000 car insurance bills. I'm wondering if there's a similar impact on businesses that have to own a number of cars.
Given I just looked at it about 20 minutes ago, I can give you I got 12 vehicles, not the problem. The insurance for all of my vehicles is $33,000. Okay.
Really?
Yeah, 12 vehicles.
Interesting.
Actually, I just switched a vehicle that I use sort of both ways to company coverage, because it turned out that I got for the same money a much more, like liability and this and that and the other thing that I was not getting from my private insurer. So I usually ride my bike to work. That's my main travel. When I travel in my car, when I get in my car anywhere, it's almost always business travel. And so, like with a straight face, I can say, yeah, the business could cover this car. And so I'm paying $1,200 either way, but one, I'm getting, like $5 million insurance and liability and every kind of bling on it. And the other one was limited tort, which is basically nothing. And so that's something that's worth looking at.
What about health insurance?
Huge exposure.
Do you know what's going to happen for next year?
It keeps going up, and if you have
I know it has been going up. Have you actually gotten a package? Do you know?
I haven't gotten ours yet.
Yes, but the point is, I'm big enough that I have a person who does this, and they're in HR, and they deal with it. Most companies don't have an HR department. Well, what if you hire somebody and the person who's in charge of the insurance, it could be the owner, it could be the owner's assistant. So you've got someone who really isn't skilled in it and what if they forget to change someone's insurance to family or something, and then all of a sudden something terrible happens? It could be a nightmare. So health insurance is absolutely a huge risk. Is someone staying up with the policies and making sure that everyone understands what they have and they're signed up? And I think my insurance, I actually think I've got a little insurance for something on that. I think there's an insurance you have if something gets messed up with that. But that's another huge. Now, is that going to happen every year? No, it might not happen for 20, 30 years, but it certainly could happen. So add that to the list, health insurance.
Yeah, health insurance is very complicated. And I took the opportunity when I was writing for you, Lauren, to really dig into it. And so I have a pretty good understanding of what I'm buying. But it's not an easy market because the big insurers will basically lie to you and about what their offering is. And they also collude within a market to make sure that you can never directly compare the products of two different companies. At least that's how it works in Pennsylvania.
One of the things I've been curious about, you read all these stories about the new weight loss drugs and how expensive they are and how a lot of policies do not cover them. But some do, and that at least at larger companies, you have a lot of employees who are demanding that their large employer cover those drugs. Has this been an issue for you guys at all?
I haven't.
No. My employees walk an average of 6 miles a day on the shop floor. So,
what about their kids and wives and husbands, though?
Well, I have one who's on the larger side, and he tried the drugs for a while. I actually don't know what. I think he was covered by his wife's policy, so it didn't show up for us. But I have a feeling that this is something that's going to work itself out over the next 10 years, that the companies that are producing these drugs are going to do everything they can to keep the price up. And because there's such a demand for them, there's going to be political pressure to bring the price down. And it's just going to work itself out some way.
Jay, you have 130 plus employees. Why do you think it hasn't been an issue for you?
First of all, maybe it is. I haven't checked lately. I haven't heard about it. I'll have to get back to you on that one. I don't know. I don't think we've had any issues. And maybe if it's not covered, it's not covered. So I don't know why I would have heard about it. I mean, if somebody is out there that did try to get the drug and it's not covered by insurance, I don't know why I would have heard about it. They just would have not done it or something. So, but here, let's move on to the next one. What's the best way of burning your building down? What do you think?
The best way? Set it on fire.
This is one of those, you could be the greatest business person in the world and do everything right. And like, all it's going to take is somebody, my feet are cold, and they plug in their space heater into 3 extension cords wound around the thing. And the next thing you know, your building burns down. Space heaters are extremely, especially in a place where they're plugging them into cords. I'm not a fireman, but I would guess that that's one of the leading ways of burning your building down. So this is a problem. I have got a big building that, the heat isn't exactly right. And sometimes it's too hot in one area, too cold in others. And I have to regularly go check to make sure no one's sticking a heater in. And then, I unplug it at night. Yeah, most of the time it's a problem. It's a potential. Everything you have could go up in smoke because one person plugged a heater into 3 extension cords. And so that's a quickie, but something to keep an eye on.
Well, we've run the space heaters all winter because my office is freezing. But we do have sprinklers in every office.
Okay,
too.
but at night, does someone go around and make sure they're all unplugged?
I usually do.
Okay.
Not unplugged. Everybody knows that they should turn them off.
But the question is, do they?
They do.
Okay, then you're managing it. I got it. The point is you are managing it, and that's what you need to do.
I think that all of my staff's aware that we're in a room that's completely filled with dry wood and veneer, and it would burn like a pile of gasoline if anything happened. We have had fires started in a couple of machines there's certain machining operations where the sawdust gets packed down as the tooling hits it, and that can heat up and cause a fire, which happens to a lot of shops.
Do you have to pay extra for your insurance because of what you just described?
No. I mean, my insurance guys have been in here because it's a sprinklered building and we keep the places clean. I mean, we have insurance walkthrough. Everybody is like, wow, this place is sparkling compared to most shops. And so I don't believe I'm being downgraded on it. My insurance just isn't. Let me see what I paid for everything last year. It's just not a huge percentage of our...
Mine is. My insurance for everything is running about 1.5% of my gross sales. That's workman's comp. That's the fire insurance, everything. That's a real number.
Yeah, I was 1.02% last year.
Okay, no, not that far off.
Jay, what do you think it was 10 or 20 years ago?
I know it was less because the sprinkler thing didn't come up. They tell me my sprinkler system's too old. Even though I have a brand new pump, the pipes are old. It had to have gone up. Well, I know what the number is. Half a point. It probably used to run 1% of sales, and now it's running 1.5% of sales. Can we move on to the next one? I got more.
Sure.
I told you 10. I don't want to shortchange you. The whole you got a website and someone goes after you because it's not ADA compliant.
We've talked about that a couple of times.
Yeah, I just after that show, I actually went to my guys and said, "Here, take a look, fix it."
And what did they do?
I don't know, charged me $500. I went through it.
Do you know if they made any real changes?
I think if I got sued by those people, I would just say, "Listen, for $5,000, I'll write you a check. Get the fuck out of here."
That's pretty much how it works.
Yeah,
no, and that's all they're trolling for business. That's pretty much how it works.
I hope you didn't just invite a lawsuit, Paul.
What are you going to do? They're out there. Like there's certain types of the risk is not so much the $5,000 or the crazy actors out there. The risk is that you let this thing live in your head, and that it destroys your ability to focus on what you should focus on.
Yeah, I by no means are telling anybody, oh my God, I don't sleep at night. I'm worried about all these things. I'm not worried about them. I just keep an eye on them. It is out there though. All right, so here's one, which you for sure have, just the workman's comp. Somebody could get really hurt. I had a guy years ago, there was a pile of plexi, 20 sheets of plexiglass, which we use. It fell on him and he got hurt. And then someone tried to pull him out from under the pile and they screwed up his rotator cuff because they yanked on his arm. So safety. Now, if you're in an office, probably not much exposure, but people fall downstairs, lighting, are the stairs, marked properly? Is there a good banister? Just safety. People get hurt at work.
We have an ongoing safety program. And then I also give all new employees a talk about workman's comp. Guess what is the most common injury? And they're like, I don't know. It's like
carpal tunnel.
No, a new person with a knife in their hand slices themselves up and needs stitches.
Oh, that's funny you say that, because when I was in college, I cut my finger. I was working in a fuse factory and I reached in there and there was a sharp thing. And I immediately, right after getting the job, had to go for stitches.
Yeah. So I think we're up to about 2,200 days without a lost time injury right now.
Just people changing tires. No one tells them, don't pull the wrench up towards your face when you're loosening it, push down. It happens all the time. You got the wrench on there and it snaps off.
That's a good one.
Little stuff like that. So yeah, there's all kinds of ways of getting hurt.
Yeah.
All right, what are we up to? 9?
9? I gotta contribute one. Jay's been doing all the heavy lifting.
Go ahead.
I gotta think. Let's see. We did customer risk, payment risk, insurance. What are the 9 we got at this point?
I'll let you know when I publish it.
All right. Burnout. How about that? That you're going along and you just sort of hit the wall, either you or one of your employees. The employee is suddenly quitting. That's a risk because you may have built your operations around this person does this thing so well, I just don't think about it anymore. You don't actually know what they're doing. You don't actually know how it gets done. And you don't realize that their performance is degrading or something is going wrong. And then one day they walk in, they're like, see you later. And then what do? That's a constant risk. One that I mitigate by always making sure that we have two people who can do critical operations.
You have a bench.
Yeah, and it's hard to do that when you're really small.
Yes.
Because the smaller you are as a company, the more likely somebody is doing 8 things. And the less likely it is that the boss understands what those people are doing.
All right, let's make that one number 10 and let me fill in 8 and 9.
Well, wait a second. Before you go leave that, Paul, have you ever felt like you were hitting that wall?
I feel like I bounce off the wall at intervals, and the amplitude and the magnitude of the force of hitting the wall has been lessened as I've become a better boss and the company has gotten larger. There is a phase in the growth of business where you're trying to do whatever tasks you have to do and manage the business and deal with employees, where there's like a maximum stress that I think it's about 12 employees for me.
Right, yeah, I'm right there with you. That's when I was just like nonstop. I just couldn't put out the fires fast enough. And at that point, I was probably in my early 30s. I started to think, I guess this is what business is. You're supposed to put out fires all day long. And I was wrong.
And you may well at the same time, when you're in your early 30s, be starting a family, and then you got all that going on.
I had it.
And so
right where I was
now at age 62, I'm much better at managing the business. The business is bigger. It's more resilient. We have a better place in the market. We make more money. It's just that stress can go down if you do the right things and if you can get your business over that hump. But there's going to be a moment when you're really in it. And it's just hard to do anything other than just get through it.
Stress should go down because you get better at running the place. You hire better people. You keep better people. You train people better. And you start to figure out how to keep them in it. And I tell people to make them feel better when they're torturing themselves. This doesn't take 5 years. It takes, I would say I was quote unquote out of control for probably 15 years. And I didn't have a mentor. And if I had myself to tell me now, I could have saved myself a lot of grief. And I tell people all the time, it's largely hiring and firing, largely. Like my big line that people always like is, if you're putting fires out all day long, get rid of the arsonists. I mean, and they're not necessarily bad people. They just can't do the job, and it's going to continue to cause you grief. So hiring and firing properly does decrease the stress dramatically.
So how many do you think we've gotten to, Jay?
I think we've got 8, but I've got 2 more easy ones. Stealing. People steal. I mean, not a lot, but there are people that steal, and you do need to put some controls in. I knew a law firm that the office manager used her credit card for hundreds of thousands of dollars of charges for her personal house, and they weren't paying attention to it. So it does happen, and you need to think about how to keep an eye. It's not like in the old days, it was a cash register maybe, and you just made sure no one took cash out of the register. In other business, I knew a guy, his CFO, this was a big company. They leased cars. When someone would turn their lease in early, he would say, you know what, I'll let you out of it. Just send a check to blankety blank to a number. And he pocketed all the money. He stole like $1 million over 4 years from this guy. And he sued his accounting firm because they were supposed to watch it. And he spent another $500,000 or some crazy number in legal fees. And he lost because the accounting firm had in their agreement that if the owner or the CFO is doing the stealing, they're not responsible for the audit. So this costs them a lot of money. And that's the worst example. But there's smaller examples. You need to put some controls in place. Did you have anybody ever steal anything from you?
I'm sure I have.
That you were aware of?
Yes. The ones that I'm aware of are employee falsifying their timesheets.
Yeah.
And so that's an instant fire.
Tools, I'm pretty sure. I mean, we have so many tools in this shop. You wouldn't believe it. It's just like your place. There's just thousands of them. So I've come to the conclusion that it's actually cheaper to just let some stuff disappear than to actually implement all the procedures that would be required to manage that and prevent it. And I'm not sure it would prevent it anyway. We have, as far as I know, a pretty honest group of people. And so it's not zero, but it's not anything that bothers me all that much. I think people take stuff home and just forget they have it or something.
Have your attitudes toward risk changed a lot through the years?
I would say I'm willing to take small losses more because in the overall context of the size of the business, it's peanuts. And the other thing is that you just get crustier. You kind of have to. You have to learn not to let every single thing bother you. And you have to be kind of cold-hearted about an evaluation of, am I going to make a big deal about this thing or that thing? I don't really remember what I used to think about these risks. A lot of them I just wasn't aware of, or they just didn't exist back when I started. But I've become, I think, more tolerant of it because I'm better at managing it.
You just learn to take things in stride. Like, okay, it is what it is. I used to get all bent out of shape. Oh my God, it's like, you have to deal with it. That's the point. If it happens, deal with it. That's all. So I would say what we're both saying is, yeah, there's some risk. It's part of business. Deal with it. That's all. Spend your time looking for business.
I think that the other part is to try to get your business in a place where it's supporting you to the extent that you can take a small loss.
Absolutely.
If a $5,000 go-away check to somebody who's hassling you is going to put you out of business, you've got a bigger problem than that person. And so trying to make sure that you're building a prosperous, capable, resilient organization is the actual answer to all these risks. That means you have to do a bunch of small things constantly. You have to be a manager as opposed to just the brilliant leader or boss or whatever you went into the business thinking it was going to be. At a certain point, somebody has to manage the organization. And at different sizes, that becomes a different answer to that question of how do we manage this organization. As I said, at about 12 employees, you're at the peak of the boss being stuck in it. Now, where I am at 28 employees, I've been able to get out of all my operational roles. So I don't really have too much more to do besides sort of keep an eye on things and do the occasional HR stuff.
Let me pay that off a little bit because I 100% agree with you. And the reason is once you start getting more than the 12, 30, now all of a sudden you can pay someone more to be a manager that you couldn't pay when you had 8 employees. So yes, you now have critical mass to where you can now hire somebody to take some of the responsibilities from you, whereas that's difficult when you only have 7 employees. So yeah, that's what happens. And then when you get to my size, I've got people in charge of every area. So I'm not doing a whole lot, but doing interesting podcasts.
You get to be the eye of Sauron. You just like focus on whatever you focus on. And it's nice. I like it. This is the best place to be when you're running a business, is get it to a certain point. And okay, it took me a long, long time to get there, but that's not everybody.
Tell me how old you were when you'd say that, all right, I got this under control. How old were you?
I would say it was about 2018, 2019. It wasn't that long ago.
So you're saying 5 years ago in your mid to late 50s?
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of when I felt like, okay, I've seen a lot. I've done a lot. I've gotten good advice. I've learned what to implement and what not. And I've learned how to do the basic things I need to do with the business.
And you've made a lot of mistakes that you learned from.
I mean,
right.
for decades. And that was because I started from a place of complete ignorance. And it took me a long time to fill in the gaps.
But that's because we didn't have the benefit of 21 hats.
No, that's
now that
that's
21
true.
hats is here, people can cut that learning curve way down. So
I absolutely agree with that.
On this list that you guys have generated, all of the risks you've mentioned, I would say are they're sort of the ancillary risks that inevitably come up if you're running a business. But you haven't mentioned anything related to the basic fundamental entrepreneurial risk of starting and building a business.
Everybody knows those. I would argue that the 10 things that we listed, most people, including me, would have never even thought about when they started their business. So that's why we're trying to fill in the blanks.
Do you think about that differently? Does it all fall into the same category of risk, or is entrepreneurial risk one type of risk that you think about completely differently than these?
Everybody comes to it from a different place, too. When I started my business, I was a kid. I had no obligations. And so that I've been sort of boiling the frog as I went along. That the risk for me starting a business in 1985 were pretty much zero. Like it either was going to go or it wasn't. And what do I have to lose? Nothing. And so if you have quit your corporate job and just emptied out your 401k and you bought a bagel shop or something, Now that's a risk because you don't really know whether you know what you're doing or whether it's going to work. And I think that one risk we haven't talked about too, and it's a huge one, is does your business fit within the broader trends of what's happening in the economy? In other words, are you fighting an uphill battle against vast forces that are arrayed against your product, service, offering?
Are you selling fax machines?
Yeah, exactly. And I've benefited in the last few years from a real broad trend in my industry, which is my competitors' workforces are aging out. And so there just aren't that many people who can do what we do. The number of my competitors goes down every day. And so we're sort of like the default guys for a lot of projects. And that's a tailwind that's happening. But if I was starting a wood shop today, I would have a whole different way of thinking about that, which is where are the people I'm going to need? And now I've been able to get myself into a place in the industry where we're one of the most attractive places to work. So we're sucking away workforce from other people. But if you're starting from nothing and trying to establish credibility, that's difficult.
Now that you have something to protect, I mean, you're not that kid who is just getting started with no obligations. Do you look very differently at investing in your business? Do you think about that risk in a different way?
Well, that's funny you say that, because in my insurance meeting, I realized that if everything burned down, it's very different at my age than when I was 40, that I'd have to think twice. What am I going to do with the money from the insurance company? So, yeah, I absolutely have changed the way I look at risk and about investing in stuff. And I don't need as much insurance as I used to. So I have to tell you, it kind of snuck up on me.
Because you could walk away if you wanted to at this point.
Now I could, but I couldn't 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about risk, sort of the intersection of risk in your private and your business life too. So I'm taking a big risk right now in spending a fair amount of money renovating my home so that it's set up to be a place where my wife and I can age in place over the next 25 years. And that's taking a large amount of my available cash. But I'm assuming that my business is going to support me over the next 10 years, that I know how to run it in a way that will get me all that cash back and then some, and then I'll hopefully be able to sell the business. So when you own a business, you not only have an expanded set of risks, but you also have a device that creates wealth, hopefully. And I think that when you get to Jay's age or my age, hopefully you've built a wealth-producing asset that is somewhat predictably producing resources for you to deploy any way you want over the future.
Or you have wealth, or you put enough money away somehow.
Now, I've never been able to do what you did, which was segment out a real estate investment from a business. Like that's just hasn't a lot of reasons, but I'm still renting it.
Well, you didn't have to. I was, growing, and I can't tell you I was that smart that I had some kind of global plan. I need a building. There's a building. So
okay,
I bought it.
But it's pretty clear that any business you start, if you can own some real estate along with it, that's hedging your risk.
I was going to make that number 11, which is your landlord.
Your risk.
Your landlord. That's a risk. Yeah. Better to own the building. SBA loan, 10% down. Can't say it enough.
If you can find a building you can afford that, we've done the math on what it would cost to build or move, and it's way more than it costs me to rent right now. So I'm just like, shrug. I'm paying that landlord whatever I'm paying him.
You know what? I had a feeling we would figure out some way to spend an hour chatting. Thank you both.
Yeah. Get the old crusty guys here and let them rip.
My thanks to Paul Downs and Jay Goltz. Appreciate you taking the time and sharing. Have a good week, everybody. One thing before you go. Everything we do at 21 Hats is created by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs to help us all learn together. If you get something out of listening to these podcast episodes, consider joining the conversation. You can do that by joining the 21 Hats Sounding Board, a Slack channel where you can tap the wisdom of a very smart crowd, or by becoming a founding member and joining our monthly Zoom forum, where you can be part of conversations much like the ones we have on the podcast. You can sign up for both by subscribing to the Morning Report. If you have any questions, you can email me at lauren@21hats.com. And if you get something out of this podcast or out of the Morning Report, please tell a friend, tell an enemy. Tell every business owner you know. Your word of mouth, owner to owner, will always be the most effective way to build this community for all of us. Thank you. It means a lot. This episode was produced by another entrepreneur, Jess Stuberon, founder of Blank Word Productions. Thanks for listening, everyone.